a little while. Let's talk to Kathryn Porter now, their independent energy analyst, one of the few people that speaks absolute common sense, and here we are, of course, at the home of common sense, about net zero and all of the kind of madness that's been going on. And it's been another weird week, Kathryn. Very good morning to you. The Climate Change Committee, who, you know, brazenly changed their name from the Committee on Climate Change only recently to the Climate Change Committee, who have fully paid up members of the Net Zero Miliband Brigade. They're paid by the Net Zero Department, they're paid by the government to be a sort of quango, if you like, and then they have the temerity to give advice to the same department on what they should do. I mean, it's all a bit cosy and sort of incestuous, isn't it?
Well, it's very cosy and incestuous, and when you look at the backgrounds of the people in charge, they don't have the relevant experience or knowledge. They have, you know, degrees in things like classics, which isn't exactly the right qualification if you're going to look at something as complex as the energy system. No,
quite. But they've now decided that we all, I mean, I find it very schizophrenic, though, this government, because on the one hand, they've got this lot of net zero nutters telling us that we shouldn't eat red meat, you know, we shouldn't really fly anywhere unless we pay even more tax to do it. We should all get heat pumps, we should all get electric cars. But on the other hand, you know, down the road in the news department at Downing Street, they want another runway at Gatwick and they want another runway at Heathrow.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the source of some conflict here between Miliband and Starmer, because I don't see how these growth plans that Starmer has now can be achieved without repealing the Climate Change Act. And that was Ed Miliband's baby. The Climate Change Act has to go. It's a huge break on economic growth and economic development. And the government will be caught up in legal action for the rest of this parliament if it doesn't get rid of it.
Yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? Because as we see different parts of the world resetting on net zero, certainly in the United States of America, BP, who suddenly woke up and realised that actually going green and giving up on oil and gas exploration was actually not what they're supposed to do. They're now going to put another 10 billion into exploring for oil and gas. You know, the whole world has realised that net zero is a con, apart from the people who are making a load of money out of it.
Yeah, and I think the UK is really swimming against the tide here. Across Europe, we've also seen, and we're starting to see an increasing pushback against net zero, even among politicians that were previously very keen on it. So really in the UK, we're the only people who are still digging in our heels and ignoring this reality. If you look at the Climate Change Committee's report, these are not things the public want. The public is not going to want its cars speed limiting. The public is not going to want to be forced to eat less meat. And I can, you know, I'd be happy to put money on the members of this committee themselves take more than 2 flights a year. So I think this is just unrealistic, unworkable, and it would be hugely expensive.
Yeah.
They're looking at spending something like a net of £33 billion by the end of this decade on net zero. And that's money that could be better spent elsewhere, on defence, for example.
Well, most of the carbon footprints of most of these characters are much bigger than normal people's, because they keep flying off on climate conferences all over the world, don't they? You know, COP29, COP27, COP28, always in places like Brazil or Azerbaijan or, you know, some or Doha. You know, they're all long-haul flights that they take. And in fact, I think I saw the woman who's in charge of the Climate Change Committee being interviewed on Laura Kuenssberg a few months ago, and she confessed to only flying when she had to work. And it's like, well, you don't have to fly to Azerbaijan to go to the climate conference. You can do it on Zoom.
And actually, Dieter Helm, who is an energy expert who speaks a lot at conferences, refuses to fly to conferences for that exact reason. He contributes on Zoom.
Right.
If you're going to speak at a conference for an hour, then taking a couple of flights to get there and back isn't really very efficient.
It really isn't. Let's talk about the turbine story as well, because this is a fascinating one in the Times today. Department for Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, say that they're now going to paint wind turbines black. We just had a voice note just before you came on from Matt, who sounded like he knows about these kind of things. Apparently, if you paint wind turbines black, the birds don't fly into them at quite such a high rate. But meanwhile, it will mean that they get a lot hotter, according to him, because white. There's a reason why they're white.
I just can't imagine the logistics of going around and painting all the wind turbines black. We've got 30 gigawatts of wind turbines installed now, many of them offshore.
Yeah.
So how exactly are you going to go and paint all of these things black? It would cost a lot of money. How long will they stay black?
Well, this is the thing. It's typical of the folly of this kind of madness, isn't it? Where and we had Rafe Heidelmann-Quinn earlier today. Also, if you painted all of those things that we're seeing on screen now black, it would look pretty sinister. And suddenly, you know, the objections which we don't see from people who don't want wind farms. I mean, suddenly I think people would object in even bigger numbers if they were all black. It would look horrendous.
I mean, this is just greenwashing, really, in black rather than green.
Yeah.
I honestly can't think why they're coming up with these kinds of ideas. Wind turbines are just hugely inefficient. They have a load factor on average of 35%.
Right.
We're spending billions on something that only effectively works a third of the time,
Right.
and then billions on stuff to back it up. We've got new wind farms at the moment that get paid more money to not generate electricity than to generate electricity.
Yes. I mean, and we're talking like hundreds of millions of pounds, aren't we?
We are. So collectively last year we spent £9.5 billion on renewable subsidies. We spent another billion on the capacity market, which is back up for renewables. And the Office for Budget Responsibility expects that to quadruple by the end of this decade.
Right.
We're spending an additional billion on curtailment. We're spending an additional 1.5 billion on grid balancing. Untold billions on actually connecting all these things up. The costs that we're paying, and this is every single year. These aren't one-off costs. These are coming year in and year out.
Right.
And the latest subsidy round is certainly going to be higher. The government's consulting on making the subsidies last 20 years instead of 15 years.
Right.
That's pretty much the entire life of a wind farm. And why is it consulting on this? Almost certainly because the industry has said we need higher prices, and it would look very bad on the current basis. So they're trying to find ways to disguise that increase.
And whenever Ed Miliband says that, you know, he can't control the price of energy because we haven't got enough of our own renewables, it's because we're reliant on fossil fuels. That's not true, is it?
Well, I mean, no, it's not true. If you look at gas and electricity price trends since 2000, you'll see that for a long time, up until 2021, wholesale gas and electricity prices were very stable. They were low volatility, but household electricity bills went up and up and up. In 2023, government data show household spend on electricity increased despite a large drop in wholesale prices. What he says just does not correspond with the data. What's making gas and electricity bills expensive at home, and electricity in particular, are all the subsidy costs. It's the cost of the energy transition. Right. Yes, we had 2 years of expensive gas, but if we hadn't done the energy transition, we would have collectively saved about £90 billion since 2006, and that would have paid for a few years of expensive gas.
Yes, absolutely right. And meanwhile, Rachel Reeves is looking down the barrel of another nightmare, which is an £8 billion black hole coming if they were to carry out these suggestions from the Climate Change Committee, because they'd lose £8 billion in road vehicle tax, which of course they're going to have to alter, because they're going to have to come after electric vehicle owners as well and say, well, actually, we can't. We promised you that you'd have a car that didn't get road tax, but I'm afraid now we're going to have to road tax it, otherwise we won't have any money.
Well, I think this was inevitable. As soon as a significant number of people were getting electric cars and were being exempt from the tax, that impact would be felt in the Treasury, and therefore they were going to have to do something. So I think that people should have seen this coming, but pay per mile will be very unpopular in this country. Obviously, it's going to penalise people who drive for a living, and I think there'll be quite a lot of pushback. And in fact, I think people would just prefer that everybody just pays road tax in the conventional way rather than moving to a pay-per-mile model.
Well, if they find out it's unpopular, they're almost bound to do it, and they'll probably want to do both, won't they? Double whammy, tax you and make you pay to drive as well per mile, because that's what Sadiq Khan's plan is, I believe. But listen, Kathryn, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Kathryn Porter, independent energy analyst there, with her description of the nonsense of net zero.